Today, in the fourth day of these teachings, I'd like to say good morning to all of you who have come to these teachings this morning. So the topic for today is fundamentally the same passage from the Jewel Ornament of Liberation. So I'm not going to add any new passage from the text. However, so yesterday I was speaking about the three types of the Bodhisattva's discipline: the discipline of refraining from harmful actions, the discipline of gathering virtuous qualities, and discipline of benefiting beings. I spoke about the essences of these types of discipline. And in particular, I spoke about the discipline of benefiting beings in a bit of length. And so we'll continue today. And within the 11 types of types of discipline, we'll continue speaking about the 11 ways of benefiting beings. And we talk about benefiting beings. What do we mean if we ask that? So basically that means how it is that we actually bring benefit or act for the welfare of sentient beings. And so here are the 11 ways of benefiting beings that we're speaking about here. Are from among the many different ways of benefiting sentient beings. Here it's like just taking out the 11 important ways that are taught. Now, these are taught in many different Mahayana sutras. They're not taught in a single place, and so for that reason, Asanga gathered them all into one place and taught them. And so here, yesterday, I spoke about them up to the 6th, so I'm going to begin from the 7th way of benefiting beings. And what the 7th one is, it's benefiting those who wish to settle somewhere. And within the 20 verses on the vow, as this is said, not benefiting your disciples, and this is actually the same in meaning. The 20 verses on the vow speaks about it in terms of the negative, and what's taught in the Bodhisattva level is talking about it from the affirmative aspect. Other than that distinction, they really come down to the same meaning. When I talk about not benefiting your disciples or benefiting those who wish to settle somewhere, to talk about it from the affirmative side, what we're saying is in the Tibet, this is talking about caring for a community and gathering monks. We read about this in the life stories of the great masters of Tibet, great Tibetan masters. This happens over again, caring for a community, gathering monks. So when you say settling somewhere, should be understood here to mean gathering group as if basically settling. If you think about it in terms of its actual meaning, there are two different ways we can understand it. And one way is basically what we talk about in the context of giving material things, like giving beds or giving loaning a place to stay. But also during the Vinaya, it's also talked about. We also talk about the local guru, the person who. So it can also be understood. Settling somewhere it also means helping someone to settle somewhere means to give them direction or to take responsibility for them. So it's not merely talking about just giving them a place to stay. It also means giving them direction in the Dharma. And being a teacher, taking the responsibility of being a teacher or a lama for them in terms of the Dharma. So that's how we should understand it. So generally, not everyone who comes to a lama wants to achieve liberation, because not everyone from the very moment we're born, not everyone is a real Dharma practitioner. It's you have to go through the many different paths and the 5 paths and 10 levels many stages in order to get it. It's not like you just arrive at a guru and immediately have ushnisha on your head and wheels on your feet. So the Lama is not someone who's going to give you plastic surgery, and so if your ears are deformed, your nose is not so nice, fix it. Like these days, there are a lot of people who do that, but these days, but the Lama is not a plastic surgeon. It's only after you do a lot of good, work hard at it, that you become a good Dharma practitioner. It's also similar, like, often, like just like there are always a lot of dogs around a monastery. When there's something to eat, when there's food and drink, then everyone gathers. For example, when we have the Kaju Monlam, during the time where we have this done on the area around it, there are more and more restaurants and places to buy things. There are also even more beggars. Even in the end, all the rickshaw drivers, the rickshaw drivers, everyone up to them, they all shave their head, put on robes, and they come saying Namo Buddhaya, right? And you can't blame them. Most of us, whether it's obvious to us or not, we're the same. It's like we gather around material things. We're the same as them. So for that reason, within it's said in the Mahayana Sutras that first you must gather disciples with materially. And so in this way, this is a really important point. So in accordance with our own situation, we need to give those who come to us, if they don't have a place to live, we give them a place to stay. If they don't have food, then we need to share our food with them, eat food with them. And in the very beginning, we need to gather the students materially and benefit our students materially. If we don't have enough facilities, then even if we have to go do services and beg for alms to get food and so forth in a dharmic way, basically we shouldn't use everything we receive only for ourselves, but without any stinginess. We must share them in common. Now, once we have gathered students, then we need to guide the students in the Dharma as much as we can. We need to try to do this do whatever we can to bring them to the Dharma. And this shouldn't just be, whatever happens. We should think about for that student, which Dharma, which way of teaching is going to benefit that. We need to examine this first. Now, if there's a Lama who has clairvoyance, then they can look with their clairvoyance and don't need to guess through inference. They can actually see directly through clairvoyance. But if you don't have clairvoyance, then you need to get to know the student. You need to become accustomed to that student and examine, and then get to know them. And once you know them, you need to see which affliction is greater than them. Do they predominantly have desire? Do they primarily have delusion? Do they primarily have aversion? We need to examine that. And then, within fitting with that, we need to teach them the Dharma. Like an example of this would be, during the time of the Buddha, there's like Nanda, the student Nanda, who was predominantly had desire. There was Angulimala, who predominantly had hatred. And then we can also think about those who had the greatest ignorance, such as Chodapuntaka. And so they had to be given the Dharma or guided on the path in ways that are appropriate for them. Then also, another thing we can think about this, we can think about whether the students have sharp faculties or dull faculties. For example, during the time of the Buddha, Shariputra and Moggallana, what first brought them into the Dharma, or what first gave them faith in the Dharma, was when noble Ashvajit, it was noble Ashvajit who tamed them or subdued them. Likewise with Milarepa, he went to Rongten Hlaga, the Nyingma teacher, and Rongten Hlaga first said, my Dharma is like incredible. It's this Dzogchen Dharma. It's really amazing Dharma. If you meditate in the morning, you awaken in the morning. If you meditate at night, you awaken at night. It's incredible instruction. The Milarepa said, when I had to go learn sorcery, then I developed signs of sorcery and just awaken. When I'm coming to practice the Dharma, then. And so basically this thing, if you meditate by day, you meditate. If you meditate by night, you meditate by night. Getting that Dharma, I'm incredibly fortunate to get this. And he didn't meditate on the Dharma. And this is said, right? But in the very end, Tathagata said to him, when I first spoke to you about taught you the Dharma, I think I was a little bit too boasted too much, and I don't have the ability to tame you. So you need to go to the one named Lodrok Marpa the translator. And so that is that. After that, he went to see Marpa in Lodrok. So it's like this, and that's when we talk about the duller, sharp faculties, and basically getting you have to teach them into where there comes in. You also need to look whether they have lacking listening, or they lack contemplation, or lack meditation. You need to examine which of these they lack. That is what imprints do they have from what imprints of desire, so forth, or what faults that are not obvious do they have. Like they might have afflictions that are not obvious, but inside, deep within their being, or deep within their mind, they might be really strong. People have faults like this, and so you need to really examine them carefully for a long time. And so we have to examine students. And after you've examined them, then you need to teach them various types of Dharma that are appropriate for them. So when you talk about the 84,000 different types of Dharma, so there are many different types of Dharma, and so to bring them up, we talk about them in terms of the 8 stages of instruction. These 8 stages of instructions, if we talk about them, are: if you have a lot of desire, it's meditating repulsive meditation. The second, if you have if you're pride, arrogance, life, hatred, meditating on loving kindness. If you have if you have too many, if you have a lot of dullness and agitation, then you should meditate upon the breath. If you have the delusion of not knowing the nature, if you're ignorant about how we go into samsara, then you need to meditate on the 12 links of ignorance. If they're ignorant on the types of things, and you have to teach them about the difference between the aggregates and spaces. And those who are appropriate for the Veda, to teach them the middle way view. The 7th is that is giving up self-deluded pride of thinking you have done something you are not, and the 8th is giving up the 7th prime of you have achieved something you have not. These two, and what these mean is, the first is when we talk about self-deluded pride. So some people have self-deluded pride. And what this means is there's this thought that they're really thinking, if they really think to themselves, oh, I've achieved something, I've got something. And so thinking of this is not in terms of Dharma here. It's thinking that you've done something that you haven't. So it's in terms of being a Dharma. So I think you have a lot of learning, or you're real learned or something. So I think I'm really diligent. And so this is thinking about it in terms of Dharma. So you were talking about giving up that sort of separate. The second of these is giving self-deluded pride of thinking you've achieved something, not thinking that you've achieved something. If you haven't realized the middle way, think, oh, I've realized the middle way. Or if you haven't realized the Mahamudra, think you've realized the Mahamudra. And so we need to get all these people to give up. And so giving up pride here is said to be very important. Usually in the Tibetan, as it's said in the Tibetan saying, when there's when you have the tree of tree of pride, then the qualities won't grow. So there won't be any because you have pride. There won't be any growth. There won't be any improvement. So when you have getting people to give up pride is really important for them to develop their own qualities. Likewise, they're also taught 5 ways to instruct there are 5 ways to instruct. And what these are, preventing and not letting your students engage in unvirtuous conduct, that's the first. The second is having them engage in virtuous conduct. The third is having them act in accordance with what must not be done and what must be done, that's the third. And the fourth is telling those who have made mistakes of their faults with an altruistic intention. And the fifth is telling those who behave well of the qualities and benefits of their action, making them happy. So that's the fifth. So in brief, there are these 8 instructions in the 5 ways to instruct are taught I'm explaining them as taught in the commentary on the 20 verses of the vows by the Acharya Bodhipatra. Now, if we put it all together, basically the meaning, if we wrap it up, is to sum it up, is that we need to direct people both by material ways and by teaching the Dharma what is going to benefit them in this and the next lifetime. Now the next of this, the 8th, is benefiting those who wish to come into Dharma. And so this is what is called in the 20 verses on the vows, not engaging in a way that accords with other minds. And so the important thing is that you need to know how to accommodate people and know how to be in harmony with people. Basically, if you are able to get along with the other person, then and if it's something, then even if it causes them suffering, or if it causes something, then it's no different than actually not getting along with it. But when we want to get to it, there are 2 different ways: accommodating them in their mind and accommodating them in conduct. There are 2 of those. So when you talk about accommodating them in conduct, to give an example of this would be like in every student, there are students who behave well, and there are students who behave poorly. So in any school, whether advanced or basic, and we have students who have bad behavior when they're really rowdy children, who are really real troublemakers. And if you have students like that, you come to think, why is that such bad behavior? Why did they become so troublesome? We need to examine this first. Is that they did naturally have a bad nature and that therefore they act badly, or is there some difficulty in their family? For example, their parents don't get along. They're always arguing and fighting. Or is their father, an alcoholic who's just always drinking, who's always drunk? Is that the reason why why they're like that? Or is it that because the father is alcoholic and only the mother needs to work, and so the mother has to do all the work, and she has too much work, and because of that, she has a short-tempered, and so then he has no one to speak to. And he has no one to kind of assuage his feelings, and so for that reason becomes very wild or misbehaved, because there's no one to kind of show him love or to give them happiness. It just naturally becomes someone who doesn't a lot of that feeling, that good feeling or that good behavior. And so we need to understand that first. And we need to go to that child. We need to talk with them. See if we can engage them in conversation. And then we need to go play games with them. And then gradually, you're going to be able to give them some excitement, give them a little bit of excitement, and try to turn them into a new person. And what that's called is like accommodating in the conduct. So basically, accommodating in conduct here means it's basically going, staying, and as we said, so no matter what we're doing, when we go with people, when we stay in the same house, eat the same food, eat off the same dishes, then we should always have the wish to help them, and always remember our original aim and intention, and that is to get them to have a better, to turn them into good Dharma practitioners. Now there are also times we need to accommodate in terms of this, not just in terms of. It's not that we always have these accommodate in terms of. Sometimes we don't need to get to accommodate them in terms of the behavior, but also in terms of our thinking. For example, when you have a really compassionate Lama who doesn't have anything that they really like or things that please them, doesn't really have, is different from them, is not. He doesn't really care if people praise them, and doesn't really get upset when people come to him. If you get to that sort of a Lama, you think to that, you think, oh, that Lama is really compassionate. Oh, go for refuge. I should become their student. I mean, that's what we think, right? Then after a certain amount of time, and when we've stayed with that Lama for a certain amount of time, we become one of that Lama's disciples, and we're someone who's like that Lama's students, and who's in their group. You say, God, like I'm one of Lama Tashi's students. I'm one of Dundrup's students. This is what happens, right? And when that happens, then other students, like another Lama's students, they say, will criticize your Lama and say that then what happens is, at that point, what you should think is, and this my teacher is a real Buddha, has no feelings of pleasure or displeasure. For him it's the same. For them it's the same if you give them honey and if you give them shit. But I can't bear that for us. I can't bear it if it's like that. And then you go off to some place where the Lama is in, where they doesn't know what you're doing, and then you concoct some sort of an evil scheme, or you think about trying to make some plan to help him. And if you think about it, but what's really happening there is that you need to actually see if you can make your mind get along, be the same, or come into harmony with that gurus, and see. You need to see, can you have better, more compassion? If you can have a better way of thinking. You need to you need to fit your mind with that Lama's mind. Instead of that, if you could do the opposite, if you think that Buddhism, you say the Lama is a Buddha, but then if you think that it has no power and no feeling, then consider themselves as no feeling and no power. And you think that you're someone who's going to be able to get away with the fence, who's going to be able to have all the skills to overcome everyone else. And thinking in that way is not good. That's a wrong view. For example, we say it's in our Tibetan, but your view may be equal to the gods, but you must get along with humans. There are many ways we need to get along with them, but there are only a few times we need to get along with people and do the people of their minds. For example, when you have an authentic guru or an authentic Dharma practitioner, we need to come into harmony with those, with the minds of those who are good Dharma practitioners. So we don't need to get along with we need to go to those who can benefit for the short term, but who are going to bring us ruin and harm in the long term. And when you look at it superficially, it may seem like it's beneficial, but we need to do that. But we need to give up them. We need to protect our own minds and gain our own foothold. Doing that is the really important point, and so this is really important. And so I think we're going to leave it for here right now. So please now let's have we will have the tea break. So now the tea break is finished, and I will continue talking about the topic of benefiting sentient beings. Now the 9th point on benefiting sentient beings, this is where we have come to. This 9th point about benefiting sentient beings is benefiting those who wish to act properly. And so this corresponds to the verse in the 20 verses on the vows, not speaking in praise of qualities. And so it's basically what it also says in the way of the Bodhisattva is, when you see someone perform merit, make them feel glad by praising them. And the meaning will be described below, so I won't describe it at this point. So basically, the meaning of this 9 point is that someone else has good qualities, being learned, venerable, and good. It's making other people know about them, and making everyone delight and celebrate them. And so these days, this is actually really dangerous. And the reason for this is because now we're in the internet age. And since we're in the internet age, we have WeChat. We also have Facebook. And other social networks, social media networks. And so in these, through these methods, we can write it, whatever appears in our mind, whatever we think, immediately. And so for one point, that this makes it easier for us to lead our lives, and it's an improvement in our lives and a simpler way of living. But from another way of thinking about it, it means we have fewer times to really think things through well. Now, this is the situation we're in now. Because in the past, if you thought you needed to read something, if you thought you needed to send a letter, if you thought you wanted to send a letter to your friends or your parents, because first of all, there's the difficulty of not having ink and paper. And the second is that very few people could write. There weren't that many people who wrote letters, right? If you knew how to write, it was easy, but if you didn't know how to write, you'd have to ask someone else to do it for you. And the third is that even if you wanted to send it, once you've written it, if you wanted to send it to the other, it would take months or even years. So at that time, people would think about other really important things and think very carefully and keep them in mind and then write the letter. However, but in these days, what happens to us now is we don't have any time to think in our minds. We don't even have time to read things well. We don't even have time to proofread, and we've already sent it off, and it's spread throughout the entire world. And also, not only that, there are also the things that we say, the things that we talk about among friends that we just said, now they're all advertised to everyone in the entire world. And so in this way, and when we're talking about it, whether we're talking about whether we're speaking orally or whether we're writing it, we have to be extremely careful about. Right now, for whatever we're thinking, whatever we're writing, or whatever we say and whatever we write, even if we don't immediately know what the effect of it is immediately, but someday, through some of it, you'll be able to understand the mistake that you've made, and there's a point where you learn what the mistake you made was. But that's too late, isn't it? In particular, for something that we monastics and lamas need to think about is when they think about the lamas from other traditions or the philosophical schools and the people in the society, with the important people, so that we need. If we were able to praise them in the ways that that's what the actual situation is, but if we can't do that, if we if we criticize them, then that's not good. In particular, these days, people write things anonymously, so people don't know who it is. And people give themselves nicknames such as dog or donkey, and they use these nicknames and are always making things up about other people or criticizing other people. And this isn't what good people, this is what a clever mother would do, is it? This is a sign of our minds going rotten, or mistakes in our minds. It's not something that would increase our confidence. And so this is something that we need to be really careful about. Likewise, if somebody says, Generally, you should praise those who need praise and criticize those who need criticism. But sometimes, instead it's said that rather than praising when you don't know how to praise, it's better to criticize when you know how to criticize. For example, also, Gyao Yungtumpa said, most love stories written by disciples are too praised too highly, turning the Lama into a charlatan. So you shouldn't write the life stories written by the students because there are many things they think, they give many opinions saying things that the Lama has done things that they did do or said things they didn't say. They think that they're praising, but actually they're turning the Lama into a lie. For example, there's also something that the Mikyo Dorje said, and what Mikyo Dorje said that I read this someplace. Mikyo Dorje said that when he was young, there are many life stories about my youth written by the older lamas, and all of those, if it's saying that I need to write a life story, and they took the lives of the previous Karmapas as examples and wrote them with that. But they didn't write my life story exactly as it is. Similarly, likewise, also when he was young and being recognized as the Karma, there was talk about there being a Karmapa from the south and a Karmapa from the west. There was this dispute over this, and at that point, the Karmapa, in order to determine the recognition of the Karmapa, they used the ritual articles and letters and so forth used by the previous Karmapas, and they used these to recognize them. And what he said about this is that I was able to recognize, and some of them I really could identify, and some I couldn't. The ones that I recognized, the people's lamas didn't speak of that I had recognized them. And so what this means is that Mikyo Dorje spoke very directly and said, in any case, what he said. Sometimes, generally when you look at the life stories of life stories, it should be something that inspire faith in people, but if they're too much praise, that doesn't help, is it? In particular, in these days, when you think about in WeChat, on one side they're praising a thing and then criticizing it, but they don't actually know how to have conversations. And so the praise and has to stir up conflict, particularly with the gurus and sangha on our side, on our own group, are of course worthy of praise and so forth. But if you praise them too highly, then other people don't like it, even if it's not really. And sometimes they don't even really want to wish them, but it just kind of slips out for them. And so, if that encourages them to accumulate misdeeds and unconsciously, then that's that they accumulate severe bad karma. And so you need to know when it is appropriate to praise and when it is appropriate to criticize. In particular, as if in the presence of the Lama, we say, "You are the Lama, you are the Guru, you are the Buddha, the Yidam, and the Dharma." You pray them you pray them heap mountains of praise upon them. In the back of them, you criticize them, you talk about their faults, and you stir up conflict behind their back. There's no point in that. There's no need to that. Actually, we should have that. If you have love and faith in the Lama, then you need to praise in private. And in the presence of the Guru, you should say the actual natures. That actually is really, is a Lama, is a student who's not hiding anything with something. As it says in the way of the Bodhisattva, isn't it? It says in the way of the Bodhisattva, speak of good qualities discreetly, to repeat them when they're spoken of. And so this is really important, isn't it? In particular in these days. So in brief, when I talk about the meaning of benefiting those who act properly is that in our life, what makes most of the problems in our life is our mouth. We need to take care. We need to have control over our mouths. In particular, we have this virus that's spreading, and this is something that's spreading through people are talking about it a lot, and they're saying all sorts of different things about it. And many people in China, so, so they basically saying things that, like in China, they've eaten everything on with four legs except for tables. And something to think about is, but basically, if you eat wild animals, it's basically. So when you eat all sorts of different things, if we could get all sorts of different things, so basically you need to take care of your mouth. You need to really control your words. This is really important. And the 10th now is benefiting those who behave badly. And benefiting those who behave badly is what's described in the 20 verses in the vows. It's not stopping wrong appropriately. Now here there are in most texts it says, not stopping Ramen according to the conditions, it said. So there's a difference in the Tibetan spelling. It's the word condition, inappropriate to the conditions. But if we look at the commentaries, it says appropriate to the faults. Now if you look at it, so this is the thing we need to investigate. And if we look at when you want to bring someone from an unvirtuous place to a virtuous place, if you can either point out their faults gently, or in a harsh way, or you can banish them to. Basically, when you say when someone is a bad person, you can't say someone's a bad person and give up on them. But instead, in order to correct them in the short term and the long term, you can. Looking at the extent of their wrong, then you can see what is the best method happening. If it's a small one, then you need to do something that fits with that. If it's a middling-sized fault, then you do that. If it's a big fault, then something else. Then basically you use whether it is a peaceful or a harsh method. You need to do whatever you can to help them. And then following this is the 11th way of benefiting. This is the final one. This is the last way described of benefiting those who can be. And this is said to be benefiting those who can be tamed by miracles. And in the 20 verses in the vows, this is said, not threatening with miracles and stuff. And here the word threatening in the text, in the Tibetan is spelled in the same way as the word for misdeeds. But here the word dikpa, it does not mean misdeeds. What it means is to threaten him, to threaten or instill fear. That's how we should understand it here. And the meaning of this is that through miraculous powers, we need to make people be afraid of misdeeds. We need to instill fear in them. For example, if you say to someone, if you do this offense, then you'll be born in the hells, and then you emanate the hells and show it to them. That's what it kind of means. For example, during the time of this, but they're the two nephews of Ananda who went forth. But they only went forth in order to get food and clothing, not for achievement. So Magdalena showed them the hells and instilled fear in them, and made them afraid of the three lower realms, as this is described in the histories in the Vinaya. And so this is making people afraid of misdeeds through miraculous. Now this is just an illustration, because we don't have miraculous powers. So if we don't have miraculous powers, so what should we do? So, of course, the best way is, of course, if you can do miracles. But if it doesn't mean that you are necessarily in a bad way. For example, there's a story in Tibet of a lama who managed to show a student their entire lifetime in just, of course, a few hours. But there was a Khenpo who told me. Now I don't remember it exactly, so I can't say it to you. But basically, the miraculous are indispensable for benefiting other sentiments. And so for that reason, it says in the Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, what it says there is that just as a bird whose wings aren't fledged cannot fly in the sky, without the powers of clairvoyance, one cannot benefit beings. The merits that those with clairvoyance attain in one day and night aren't gained in even 100 lives by those who do not have it. In other words, in order to develop, to benefit sentient beings, it's really important to develop the clairvoyant powers. But clairvoyance it's very difficult to achieve this without achieving the actual practice of the jhanas. But now we sort of pretend that we tend to kind of say, I'm able to speak with the deities. I can speak with Tari. This morning I spoke with Guru Rinpoche came to me this morning, and he gave me a command today. And so there are people who kind of boast about it in this way. And so. Or there sometimes people say, oh, in a past life you were my student, now you need to be my student too. So that's that sort of thing. And these fake clairvoyances are for people who generally have no consciousness. And if you know how to say anything, if you want to be able to tell lies, you don't need any. If you're experienced in it, you can tell anyone. But that's not achieving the jhana. So what that's called is lying about supreme human qualities, and so that's not going to do it. Fool people and harm others. It's not going to bring benefit to other sentient beings. So basically, pretending that you have clairvoyance when you don't, it's not benefit. Preparing that you have miraculous powers when you don't will only give you difficulties. There's nothing else to do for you. But at this point, here, if you don't have miraculous powers, then so how do you practice this 11th way of this one? Then there still is a way that we can practice it, as we say in Tibet. In Tibetan, we have this that says, "Failing once teaches you more than being taught 100 times," as the saying goes. It's difficult to say that only teaching and giving advice to others is going to If there are too many people and there's too much advice, then there's a fault, right? Too much teaching, there's a fault. And so no matter who we are, whether you're size, whether you're scale, or if this comes to a point where they don't get to a point where they can see, then they have come to the limits of their abilities, then there is difficult for them to improve or get better. If otherwise, the person who's teaching always experimenting this and thinking, then they think I can't do anything without them, I'm going to have difficulties with it. Then that other person, if you protect them, if you take care of them beyond that limit and give them to it, then that person becomes someone who's always dependent upon someone who's not able to stand upon their own 2 feet. And so this example of this is like, in our if we see in the life stories of our Kaji lineage, there are many such stories of this. For example, with Telopa and Naropa, and Marpa and Milarepa. There are many different examples of this. But if you look but the life stories of Telo and Naropa are a little bit they're difficult for us to get our heads around. Think about the 12 major trials, the 12 minor trials. Think about Naropa's 12 great trials, the 12 minor trials that are taught about. And if we think about them, one of them is jumping off of the roof of a house. And you can't explain it exactly so, but to say it in general terms, Naropa in that time of India was a really well-known pandit or a scholar. He's a great scholar, and he's very famous in India. But he cast all that aside, and the title and the fame. And what was Tilopa? If you looked at it, he was like a fisherman. He was basically a fisherman, like an ordinary person. And he followed him as his teacher. And following him as his teacher, and for a long time, Tilo didn't teach him any Dharma, and not teaching him any Dharma. And then every day, Naropa would go to Tilopa, would prostrate to him and court him, and every day. And then one day, Tilopa just got up and said, and so if it's a stupa or a temple or something, I don't remember exactly what it is, but it got to the top of a tall building, and it looked to the side, the right and looked to the left, and then he said, if I had a true receptive disciple, he would jump off of this building. And Naropa thought he looked to the right and looked to the left, and he said, there's no one else but me here. There's no one but me here. No, he was probably saying this to me. And so without the guru saying anything more, he jumped off the roof. And he jumped off of the roof, and when he jumped off the roof, as soon as he jumped, Naropa basically was almost killed by doing this. He was just lying there in complete pain. Everything broken. And just a little bit later, Tilopa came down and said to Naropa, so how are you feeling? And Naropa said, there's no hope for me. So he's like, does it hurt? So if you're going to jump off the roof of a house, and so if there's how you can be not hurt and be pain? Of course, yeah, I'm in pain. And Tilopa said, it's no problem. I have this pith instruction, I'll give it to you. And he waved his hand up, and he immediately got better. If we think about this in one way, it's really an amazing story that it's built amazement, but in our human lives, when you think about it, it's just like, think about it as a story, that's one thing, but if you think about it actually how it is, it's difficult for us to get our minds around it. And for example, if I say to you, and today, there are a lot of you, right? It's not just one person. And Naro was only one person. I said, there's so many people, okay, you all. If you're really receptive, go up to the top of Tergam Monastery and jump off. And you say, oh, that girl must have gone crazy. It's better to call a doctor for him. It's probably this. You wouldn't think, oh, this is a sane lama, would you? And even if you were to jump, then you'd only be the fun. I can't cure you. So there'd be no point to it. It's better not to jump than to jump. There's no point to it. But the stories, the life story that brings us the greatest feeling for our minds is the life of Milarepa. And Milarepa was told by was told to go. Was made by Marpa. He was sent by Marpa to go stay in unpopulated lands with wild animals. If you say that Marpa had no compassion, it's not that. Did he have no feeling for Milarepa? No, it's not that he had no feeling for it. In many of Milarepa's songs, it says in Milarepa's songs, in caves and unpopulated lands, there's never a time when discouragement is dispelled. It says this over and over again, but Milarepa spent time in the unpopulated mountain retreats, and sometimes about prepared to die from pangs of hunger, or prepared to die from pangs of grief, or prepared to die from pangs of grief. But because of these, he ignored all these. He was able to accept them and become one of the great. Was he able to become one of the great Mahasiddhas of Tibet? He was. So the reason Marpa giving Milarepa forcing Milarepa to go through such difficulties is not that he lacked compassion. It's because he had too much compassion. It's not that he lacked it, it's he had too much compassion for Milarepa. And so, does it. For example, like there are many stories, like when Milarepa was building the houses for it, and there are many stories of Marpa crying in private, saying, "Oh, this student has such devotion, who's really serious." But there are many stories of Marpa spending the day. If he didn't have compassion, there would be no need for him to cry, would there have been? And for this reason, this 11th. So benefiting Senchen, the main meaning of this 11th, this one of benefiting those contained by miracles, means that if you have miracle powers, then you can do what you can do with these miraculous powers. But if you can't, it means if you make them do something hard, and you do this with an altruistic intention, then it's beneficial. And sometimes if you plan that you pretend that you have interest and they just give them a hard time, then it's difficult for them to improve. So for that reason, making people undergo hardships is a way of benefiting others, as it said. And so now I've finished the 11 ways of helping sentient beings. So 11. So tomorrow I'll speak about there are other ways of describing benefiting beings described in just these 11, and I will describe them. Even then I will continue teaching on the text of the Jewel of Lineage, and I'll talk about those. But as But when I think about it again today, I think we need to add another teaching. Actually, in this teaching, in the schedule, I was supposed to begin from the 13th. I was supposed to teach from the 13th. However, but on the 13th, we had the opening ceremony of the Gunchun, so for that reason, I didn't give a teaching on that day. And the reason for that is on the 12th, it wasn't a good day astrologically, and so for that reason, we had to move the opening ceremony to the 13th. So my teaching began on the 14th until the 18th. But if we look at the situation of where we are now, I probably need to teach until the 19th. So maybe I'm speaking just without unceasingly enough. You're wondering if he's never going to finish. Maybe he just hurry up and finish it. It's possible you might think that. So I'm going to like to apologize to you, but I think I probably do need to teach on the 19th as well. So on the 19th, we'll finish, and then I think it probably will not be too difficult for you. So for the last teaching will be on the 19th. So generally today, the best thing is for the jewel ornament is if I would actually come in person and teach in person, because from one perspective, because it's like I have less respect for the great, no respect for the masters of the past, because I'm staying far away and saying all sorts of different things. But here I'm in retreat, saying this sort of retreat, and from one perspective, resting my body and mind, and then from another perspective, as I explained during the Kaji Munlam, I've got a couple of things that I am working on. And so we talk about benefiting the teachings in general, or teaching benefits in general, or taking some responsibilities that I have in this lifetime, or actually trying to do a few things that I need to do. And so I have plans to do those. And so for these reasons, I'm unable to come in person. And so I'd like to apologize to all of you and beg your pardon. But from my perspective, it's like no different than if I came. When I come, from the first of all, I try to have the best motivation I can. And so I think of you as if I was present, whether people. And I hope that there's some benefit to all of you. I don't have any powers, but because of the kindness of the lamas and the jewels and the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, I hope that there's some prayer. And so I'm teaching with this motivation. And as I say this, I'm not, saying that just. And I'm trying to be as careful. I'm trying to be as respectful as I can, and trying to be teach as best I can. And I think that you are all listening well. I'm watching over the internet. Actually. So in any case, it doesn't matter about the distance. In terms of teaching and listening, for me as a teacher and you as listeners, I think we all need to be careful when teaching the Dharma and listening to the Dharma. I think that we can all think that it's something that we can rejoice in and that can be meaningful for us. So in brief, during this Winter Dharma gathering, not only for this teaching, but also whether you're doing the debates or the group debates, or whether you're doing the services like the Mahakala Puja or the traditional Losar ceremonies, or the particular puja for Chomo Hatashi Tserengma, and also when you're doing the Che Puja, and also having the puja for the teachings to flourish. And so from the beginning to the end, whatever programs we have, I hope that they can govern. Again, I believe that they will. So, and I think that I'm keeping that in mind. So, I'd like to ask all of you to have some enthusiasm. So I think it's best to leave it here. So thank you very much.